Hello and welcome to my series DevSecOps. Today we want to have a look at Debian repositories and why they are mission critical. If you want to know what you can do against it and what toolings you have for free, stay tuned. DevSecOps and Debian repositories. Debian repositories, why do we need them and what this has to do with DevSecOps? Well, first of all, what is a Debian repository and why do we need Debian repositories? So if you're looking at Wikipedia, Debian repositories are a package managing system for Linux distribution, for dedicated Linux distribution, and Debian is one of the base Linux distribution you can find. I will show you here's a link from Wikipedia, then you can see how many different distributions are based on Debian, for embedded systems, for servers, for desktops, whatever. So many things, even for mobiles. So one thing is, if you want to modify the operating system, or if you want to install it or update it, whatever, you need Debian repositories. So what you're doing is you're going to command line and you're writing a command like apt-get, update, or whatever. And in this moment, this package manager will search for the repositories that are defined in a file called sources.list. So what's going on here? So it will immediately connect to a remote repository. By the way, if you want to know more about local, remote and virtual repositories, check out my tutorial about this one on YouTube. But here I'm just focusing on the remote repositories right now, because then you are connecting to some external authority that will provide you the packages that are used for this operating system. For example, you want to install a program, a firewall, a compiler, whatever. So you need it for new installations. If you just want to install the operating system, you need to update it. You need these repositories for security patches. And what are the functionality that will be served? So, or other way around, where is Linux running? Linux is running, for example, on servers. Nearly everybody knows Docker. Inside Docker, you're dealing with Linux, different versions of Linux, but in the end, it's a Linux under the hood. You can find it on bare metal on servers. You can find it on desktops, on development machines, but you can find it on infrastructure environments as well. So, for example, on routers, on network switches, and so on. So, Linux is nearly everywhere. And so it's worth to have a look at these Debian repositories in general and why do we need them. So, I mentioned that if you want to install it, if you start an update or whatever on this operating system level, you're connecting to a remote repository. This remote repository is listed in a file called source.list in Debian, and then it will just start connecting to this addressed repository. So if this repository is not available anymore, then you have a challenge, because then there will be just a timeout and will say, no, it's not available, so you have to find a different one. There are lists available of public available Debian repositories, and then you can just switch to another one. On the other side, you're trusting completely to this external authority, so you have to make sure that you're not grabbing compromised binaries. How to make sure that you're not getting compromised binaries. I have one tutorial about PGP key servers, so that you can have a PGP key server cache internally, so that you can verify very fast these binaries without internet connection if you're on an on-prem or high-sec environment. But on the other side, you have to verify somehow these binaries that you are just getting what you're requested. So if you're in the field of DevSecOps, or what this has to do with DevSecOps means, security is everywhere. This is one of the key points of DevSecOps. I'm not going into the details of DevSecOps in general about this. I have a few tutorials. You can check them out on YouTube. But the key point here is that security is no dedicated step somewhere. It's part of the whole production line. It's part of the whole environment you're working in. So security must be everywhere, and it's like quality. So you're just dealing with it in every single step. Embedding security in the whole application lifecycle, or in the lifecycle of this operating system instance that is running somewhere, means that even the install process or the maintenance and update process must be secured somehow. So what could you do? Instead of trusting just external authorities, you could ramp up an internal Debian repository, and mostly people are just using this like a caching mechanism. So it's true. So if you have a local Debian repository inside your local network, and you're requesting this one first, and then this one is grabbing the missing parts, then you have a speed up if you're installing a lot of instances, or if you're doing it a few times. So if you're updating an operating system, then every instance will go over the same cache, and then you have a speed up on this for sure. But on the other side, if you have this repository, and this is the only gateway to the outside world for this operating system updates or installations, then you have something very interesting that you can use for security. Because if you have this single repository, or this logical instance of a repository, it could be a high available instance with dedicated with a bunch of nodes. If you have this one, then it's a perfect place to put here or start here with a mechanism that will scan all binaries that are going through this proxy or through this repository. Means the configuration would be that all internal devices, every Docker image, every desktop, server, network switch, whatever that's dealing with Debian repositories, will go through your own Debian repository. Okay, if you have this one, then you have something reached already, because you have the full control about this internal repository. You can make sure that everything that you are grabbing once will stay there as long as you will need it, and not as long as someone else will decide this is useful. This is very interesting if you have to deal with long-term support versions, if you want to make sure that you're independent from the outside. So independence from external resources somehow is a good advice. We saw it a few times in the history that things that are over years are available for free disappeared somehow because the company was bought, or they changed policies or whatever. So the next thing is, it would make sense to have some kind of resilience. For example, if you are redirecting to one external repository, then you could add a few mirrors there, so that if the first one is down, then you're just going to the mirror one. So we are talking about virtual repositories. So with Debian repositories, you can not only have remote repositories, you can virtual repositories as well. Because with these virtual repositories, you can aggregate different Debian repositories to one logical one. So, and this is a very powerful tool from Artifactory, because Artifactory can manage a lot of different repository types. Debian is just one of them, but it will offer you three kinds of repositories: local one, remote one, and virtual one. Local ones are interesting if you are patching by yourself Debian packages and you need a place to store them. For example, you're applying a security patch before it's publicly available, then this is the right weight or the right place to store. The next one, the remote repositories, as I mentioned, are just a connection to the outside world. And with virtual repositories, what you could do is you can aggregate different kinds of repositories. And you have the possibility to use local repositories. You can aggregate a bunch of remote repositories, and you can aggregate different virtual repositories. A very cool thing with virtual repositories in Artifactory is that you can declare a default push repository. So even if you're building Debian packages by yourself, you can just push it to the same virtual repository and it will redirect it to the local one. So everywhere inside your network will be just easy to configure, because you have on every device, everywhere, the same single source you have to maintain. So your sources.list will be just one entry, or will contain just one entry, your local or your own virtual repository. So you don't have to maintain this one, so you don't have to maintain on every machine. For example, if there's a change from the URL from the public authorities or so, you don't have to change it, because you have it inside your virtual repository and you're masking it. So a good advice is the local one for your own patch, or if you're creating your own binaries. The remote one are just a connection to the outside world, and then you're aggregating this one to the virtual one so that you have access every time, everywhere. So the next point will be a short view to vulnerabilities and to the compliance part, because if you are dealing with Debian repositories, means that you're aggregating a lot of different dependencies. Dependencies are the low-hanging fruit for DevSecOps. I have a YouTube video just about this one, because this is a very important topic, this managing of dependencies in general over all tech stacks. But if you are just looking at the Debian part, we have it here in a way that I want to scan not only for vulnerabilities, I want to scan for compliance issues as well. So first of all, I have these repositories internally. I'm caching them, so I have a speed up, and Artifactory can connect it with X-Ray. X-Ray is a scanner, or is our security solution for the repository part. And the good thing here is that it will scan not only Debian repositories, it will scan everything that is inside Artifactory. So you will get a full impact graph in what Docker layer your Debian binaries are available, or if you're using this Debian package with some other program or whatever. So Artifactory will give you, in combination with X-Ray, the full impact graph of vulnerabilities. So if there's an update on our site, so we're aggregating different security resources and then updating our databases. If you're on a cloud, you have this immediately. If you're on-prem, then it's up to you how often and how fast you are integrating this new security vulnerability information. But you have this information, and then immediately all compositions that are part or that are in Artifactory are scanned again. And even if this binary is in production, we are not scanning production. So we are not scanning your router, we are not scanning whatever your Docker image that's in production running, so this instance. But we are aware of all images that are inside Artifactory. If you're deploying from Artifactory, you know immediately, oh, this image is infected, or there is a compromised one, or there is a vulnerability that's critical for us, and this image is running somewhere in your infrastructure. So, and then you can start dealing with this one. One thing is that with X-Ray you can start building semi-automatic hardening processes, and this is quite cool on operating system level. So for example, you have some Docker images and they are using Debian as a base, then you will find that there is a vulnerability, maybe because you are just grabbing a Jenkins or whatever Docker image that's running inside your production line, and immediately you can start pushing this Docker image, for example, to a quarantine repository and start updating the operating system libraries. And this update will be done over your own Debian repositories, and this means that you have full control and the knowledge if there is something in these binaries you are just updating. So if you are aware of these vulnerabilities, we have this concept of, let's say, how to define what should happen, and you can start interacting with the environment. So what we're doing is we have this concept of rules and policies. With rules and policies, you're just declaring what should happen if you found a vulnerability. And then with watches, you are connecting these rules and policies to the repositories, in this case to the Debian repositories. But you can use the same mechanism to other repository types as well. So if you're defining once what should happen, you can apply to Docker repositories, Debian repositories, whatever repositories. So the way to deal with Debian repositories are completely aligned in the way you're dealing, for example, with Maven repositories and vulnerabilities. So the same information, the same notifications, the same whatever processes are triggered. So what happened here is that with this one, we now aware of this vulnerability, and we have with X-Ray the possibility to start webhooks. So you find something, you start a webhook, you are triggering external process, and this one can grab via REST API, for example, the dedicated information from X-Ray, or it could start configuring or working or interacting with X-Ray Artifactory and everything. So because the whole JFrog platform you can use via REST API, and you can use it within CLI. So altogether means that we have now the possibility to connect with all infrastructure parts to Artifactory. Because we are not connecting to Artifactory, but we are using the repository that's inside Artifactory. With this, we have a speeder because we are caching. The next one is we can scan for vulnerabilities, and if there's a vulnerability, we can start with webhooks, dedicated process to start hardening or informing or shutting down systems, whatever. You can build semi-dynamic workflows that can pre-harden, for example, some images and all this stuff, so that just a human should verify what's the result, so you're not doing it by yourself. And with these virtual repositories, you can simplify the repository structure, because otherwise you have to maintain different repositories on every single machine. And with virtual repositories, you have on every machine just one reference to a virtual repository. You can have different of them if you want to have different combinations of external repositories for routers, for desktops, for servers, and so on. But in general, this is quite easy to do. So the next thing I would like to show is how to create a Dbin repository, and how this is done inside the Artifactory instance. Okay, now we want to have a look at how to create Debian repositories. So for this, log into your JFrog platform instance and go to the administrative menu. This is here behind this icon, and then to the menu point repositories and the submenu repositories. First, you see here the tab local, but we don't want to store own artifacts. We just want to connect to remote and already existing Debian repositories. So you have to go to the remote tab. And I created already a few of them. I will show you how to do it. But if you have a lot of repositories, you can filter the view here if you're typing here some stuff in. And what you can see is, first of all, I really recommend to have a scaling naming schema, just to make sure that you have an easy way to filter and navigate and to see later in different UIs what kind of repository it is, and if it is a remote one or virtual one, and so on. So here I have, for example, for the Debian, selected the Austria remote and the German remote. These are both mirrors of the original one. So you can see here the URL you need to know. If you don't know or you need a list of available mirrors, you can check it from the Debian site itself. So go to www.dbn.org/mirror/list, and there you will find a list of all primary mirrors here ordered or yeah, it's the country, then the URL, and the architecture. This is an interesting or important thing. So check for every mirror if the architecture that is mirrored fits to your needs, so that you're not missing something. And then you have here just the URL you're using. Okay, so create 2, 3 or 5 mirrors, it depends on you, with a remote repository. So how to do this one? It's just you need a key, the URL, and don't forget to enable X-ray scanning. And for convenience, go to Advanced and activate Allow Content Browsing. With this, you can check via web UI what's the content of a repository. It's just for convenience. Okay, so if you have done this one, so we have now this, let's filter. We have this remote A and remote B from the mirrors. Then you can combine this one in virtual repositories. Virtual repositories should have a short name, because mostly this is a repository you're using inside your configurations. And in this virtual repository, again, give it a logical name. You can select the repositories you want to have inside, and then that's it. Yeah, just limit to the architectures you really need, so that X-ray is not scanning too much, and the compression formats you want to support if there's some special need. So, by the way, how to create. If you start creating a repository, normally you're clicking to New, and then you have to select this type of repository, for example here, the Debian one, and then you can start filling out everything. We want to navigate through artifacts, so you can see here, for example, this virtual repository Debian. Then content browsing is allowed, so you can go inside this. But the most important thing is this URL. This is exactly the URL you need in your sources.list to access this one. If you're not so familiar, you can get help here for this, how to use it inside your Debian distribution. Set me up is a point. Then you can just select what type of repository you want to have. Here it's pre-selected based on my navigation here. It's my Debian repository, otherwise check a different one. And then you will see here, for example, the command, how to add this one to your sources list. And here you see, again, inside this command, what's the place of this file. That's it. After this, you can just connect, install, and update your system. Okay, there's one thing missing. I always spoke about vulnerabilities, but Debian repositories have a lot of compliance stuff inside as well. So X-ray is not only able to scan for vulnerabilities, it's able to scan for licensing as well. So if you're dealing with the Debian universe and you must make sure that some licenses are not active in some environments of your infrastructure or inside your production line, this is one thing you should place inside rules and policies to make sure that there is a definition, don't use this license, and then you can connect it to the Debian repository. So you will be informed every time, or you can just stop downloading artifacts if the license doesn't fit to your environment. So just have this in mind. Not only vulnerabilities, compliance scanning with X-ray is done as well. Okay, we saw that Debian repositories are nearly everywhere in your supply chain or in your infrastructure, from the desktop over Docker images up to the router switch embedded systems, and the Debian repositories can be managed by Artifactory in a very efficient way, not only for caching, but for compliance and security scanning as well. The best thing is if you're trying out this one by yourself. So for this we have a free tier, and this free tier, how to get a free tier, I have a dedicated how to about this one. Check out my YouTube channel to see how you can get a free tier. With a free tier you will get Artifactory and X-ray, and then you can just create your first remote Debian repository and scan it with X-ray immediately. So I'm now done for today, so I will go a little bit around in the forest now and will make me a cup of coffee, and then that's my day. So otherwise, enjoy and see you in the next video.